Yo, hello everybody. Welcome to another episode of Simply Bitcoin IRL. Today's very special guest is a friend of mine, also, Aleks Svetski. But before I bring him on stage, I want to give a shout out to the awesome Bitcoin companies that make this show possible. SwanBitcoin.com, best place to buy Bitcoin by Bitcoiners for Bitcoiners. If you haven't already done so, check out SwanBitcoin.com and also check out their new offering, swan.com/IRA. Also, the biggest Bitcoin conference on the face of the planet, Bitcoin 2023. It's going to be hosted in Miami Beach, Florida, May 18th through the 20th, 2023. You can use promo code to get yourself a discount to the conference. Anyways, Svetsky, how you doing, bro?
Yo,
Happy to see you and talk with you. I don't think we've ever had a long format interview. I think you've only come on the live show.
yeah, I think so, man. And the one where you and what's his name, Quakers used to Phil, sorry, used to cut and dice things in the middle.
Yeah, the live show. This is
Oh, that is the live show.
that
Okay,
is
well
the
there
live.
you go.
You know,
Shows what I
actually,
know.
you know what? No. You're actually right. You're actually right because that became a live show. So it
Uh-huh,
went
uh-huh,
from
uh-huh.
we used to pre-record it and then we figured out how to do all of that stuff live, right? So it
Fucking
evolved.
machines.
I guess evolved is the correct term. Anyways, bro, how are you? How's life? How's life
I'm
treating you?
good. I'm good. I am fucking Svetsy's got his mojo back, working on a couple new projects. Some things on the side, and then I'm helping out a new Bitcoin company called Lucent Labs. We're doing some really interesting stuff. So yeah, man, got a lot going on, but also writing the new book, The Bushido of Bitcoin, and wrote a couple fiery articles, the Three Generations Theory last month, and then obviously this month the masterclass on why Bitcoin matters thanks to SVB. So loads going on.
That's awesome, dude. Good to hear. Good to hear you're busy as well. Anyways, dude, so first of all, congrats. I don't think this has happened. I think this has happened. I think this is the second time it's happened to you where one of your articles got published on Zero Hedge.
Yeah, I think probably yeah. I think three or four, but yeah, it's rare, and then sometimes Zero Hedge picks it up and does the rounds. I think I did the rounds with Freedom Coin, Slave Coin actually, which was really good because that basically took a shit on Ethereum. It was like it was a good one.
Oh yeah. So dude, so the latest article that got published was called Bitcoin Three Generations Theory. Bitcoin will take 60 years for mass adoption. Now, what's really interesting, Swetsky, is that you're not the only person that I've heard this from. I've also heard this from Matt Hill, CEO of Start9 Labs,
Uh huh.
right? And he said
Uh
the
huh.
same thing. So I find that very interesting. Why don't you explain to everybody who's listening and watching why you believe Bitcoin will take 3 full generations? And honestly, you know what? I've heard that before, but mostly it's just kind of one of the things that I do on my free time, guys. Um, I love collectivist ideologies, to put it very, very nicely in PG-13. And one of the things that I remember was the demoralization of a society to make it a communist society. And the case that he's making is it takes 3 generations for that to happen, right? So is that where you got the inspiration from? No?
Nah, to be honest, the inspiration came from two things. One was just yo, did I lose you? Uh
You
oh.
full screen.
Oh, okay. All right. I was like, now I'm the Simply Bitcoin podcast. So the inspiration number one was just the spaces I was doing actually with the boys from what's that app, Coinbits app, and they just asked me, they're like, so what do you think about mass adoption? I was like, you know what, I think all of us Bitcoiners are jumping the gun, and what had triggered me basically was, I spent 2022 pretty angry at the world and life and all this sort of stuff, and I was like kind of doing the whole Twitter toxic thing and lashing out and everything. And I took a sort of long, hard look at myself in December, say, hey, I need to calm down. I need to get the fuck off Twitter. And I need to think about what sort of got me into Bitcoin in the first place. And for me, it was like educating people on this thing. And I took sort of a step back and I just started thinking about, Bitcoin more broadly, thinking about how, people like my mum, for example, or my wife or my sister, perceived Bitcoin. And like even Paloma, she was doing that little Bitcoin spaces for a little while, but even she, like, to be honest, she doesn't care really. Like she just wants to have some money, um, have a bit of savings. Like she's doesn't really care about the revolution, all that sort of stuff. Like, yeah, sure, it's all nice, and she's based and all this sort of stuff. But like, really, most people don't sort of dive into it to the depth that we as Bitcoiners do. So anyway, what my whole thing was when I got asked was like, man, this is going to take longer than all of us think. And the trigger point for me was, someone's like, yeah, but what about technology adoption curves? And I was like, look, Bitcoin's projecting a technology adoption curve on something like Bitcoin, which is a technologically driven socioeconomic phenomenon, so it's going to have a very different adoption curve, is just stupid, because you can't expect tomorrow people to be to put their entire fucking money and their life savings into this thing. Like Bitcoin is still more broadly perceived as a speculative asset, as something that is risk on. I've been in South America now for a number of years, traveling around the world. I've got a family in Eastern Europe. Like the places that you think might need it most, they still don't understand that. They look at it as an investment and they brush it off straight away because, oh, I don't have enough money. So the second piece for me was when I was at the Satoshi Roundtable, which was full of shitcoiners, but there was a good Bitcoin cohort there doing our job. And one of the things I kept hearing at a series of the roundtables was like, oh, what can we do to help Bitcoin compete in the features marketplace, basically? Like, look at Ethereum, they got all these developers, all this sort of stuff. And I said, look, Ethereum's number one use case is attracting all the monkeys away from Bitcoin, right? So they can go and build and break shit over there, because we don't need that. And what I found was, again, this underlying theme of trying to, it's kind of like pushing a string, right, to make it move, but it doesn't work like that. The string needs to be pulled. And, that same sort of thing is happening with Bitcoin, is people are like trying to cram features into it. Like the latest thing is this drive chain stuff, right? One of the guys was talking about drive chain, and I said, what's it similar to? And he said, it's like Liquid, but it's better, and blah blah blah. And I just asked the question, I'm like, so who's using Liquid? Fucking no one. No one cares, because we're just not there yet. Like Bitcoin is still in the first sort of generation. And anyway, to sort of sum up this line of thinking, the three generations theory is the idea that generation one is like infecting the system and kind of having like a host parasite relationship. And Bitcoin in this sense is like the parasite or the virus, like infecting the host. The next stage is kind of like the infrastructure generation, and then the final one is the utility one, and that's where we sort of enter mass adoption. So anyway, we can dig into each of those, but that was sort of the inspiration behind it.
So you mentioned the social economic aspect, and I want to double that. I want to double. I want to really want to focus on that, because I think that, especially the last couple of days, if you guys have been tuning into Simply, we've been advocating for, mostly from the technological advancement, and you see a lot of those charts very popular on Twitter, right? The famous adoption curve and stuff. How would something that has consequences on the social economic level, which, mind you, I do agree with you fundamentally. I think Bitcoin is going to fundamentally change the relationship between state and the individual. How is that adoption rate differ? Like what is it the difference between the two? Is it that people are so brainwashed to living in a certain way and thinking in a certain way? Is that where you're going with that?
Yeah, it's cultural, right? It's cultural. So particular norms, developed over time in a generation. People do things in a particular way during their lifetimes. There's I mean, laws and regulations, and business structures, and how people communicate and operate, the way they live life, the way they run their businesses, the way they do all this sort of stuff. Technology impacts it, but the underlying processes don't change that quickly, and then the underlying culture doesn't change that quickly. Like it took 50 years of money printing really to sort of like destroy America, right? And America's still going, to be honest. So like these things, larger cultural, socioeconomic sort of shifts take time to filter into society, because like these are broader paradigm shifts than just a phone. And I think I say in my article at the beginning, like Bitcoin's not just a fucking iPhone. It's not just online payments. It's not just the internet. It's not just any of these things. It's how we measure the language of value. Like it's fucking money. It took years for people to trust. Sorry, it took centuries for people to trust fucking gold. It took years for people to all we've had in the fiat system is we've had the changes in payment systems. Like, when people talk about, oh yeah, but what about when gold went off when money went off the gold standard to the fiat standard? Like, what we had was decades or probably a couple centuries of priming people that there was a government and a central bank in place before we could go anywhere near full fiat. So, you can look at that cycle as a much longer 400-year period before people were ready to trust going off a gold standard, for example, by and large, with a primary reserve currency. So a lot has to happen before people are going to trust some fucking internet program, with all of their wealth. Like, it's just not going to happen that quickly. So anyway, that's
dude, and I completely agree with you, by the way. And of course, my girlfriend. One of the most astute observations she's ever made, and it stuck with me. I actually mentioned it to Jeff Booth a couple months ago. And I'll say it to you, Svetski, is she's like, Nico, great money, Bitcoin's best money. I totally understand it. But she's like, but honestly, I believe people are too stupid. And again, I don't say that gently, and I'm not trying to insult anybody. I'm not trying whatever, but again, those are her words, not mine. But if you interpret it, what does that mean? That means that I think people, specifically in the West, are so distracted with the bread and circuses, so distracted with the efficient financial rails, that I don't think they're even seeking sound money. And that was one of the things also, that when Natalie Burnell interviewed Michael Saylor, and she asked him like, hey, what is the thing that keeps you up at night? He said the same thing. He's like, in the same thing, and just in a different way that my girlfriend said it. And I think you're making the case for that as well. I don't think people care about sound money. And I want to tie this in because I feel like we've beaten that up. Does it matter? Because one of your favorite articles is "We Are the Remnant," right? The masses don't matter. So does it matter, Svetski, that most people, the average everyday person you interact with, don't really care about sound money?
Well, I don't think so. So, like, if we look at the three generations again, so I mentioned generation one is the infection stage. It actually lines up with the whole remnant idea, is that the infection stage is the stage where you've got to appeal to the remnants, right? Like the people who are the 1%, who are the outliers, who are the intolerant minority, the people who refuse to comply, right? And in that phase, Bitcoin is fundamentally non-appealing to everybody else, because most people are not fucking like that. Bitcoin's got to appeal to the 2% before it appeals to the other 98%, or to the 20 before the 80, whatever sort of ratio you want to use. But it's got to appeal to the minority first. And that phase, is where Bitcoin is at the moment. So, step one, Bitcoin had to sort of first like prove that it was something that somebody would trade it for, like a good or a service, which we had with Bitcoin Pizza Day. Then it needed to prove itself that, it has some sort of utility, which it did with Silk Road. Then it needed to kind of like enter and start to financialize itself, which it did with Mt. Gox. Like, it needed to kind of infect the economic element and start to become a market good, like, which it did. And then everybody realized you can make fucking money out of this shit. So all the shitcoiners came and they made copies, which is probably what we had to go through anyway. As much as we hate shitcoins and all that sort of stuff, we have to go through that fucking phase. So that sort of brings us to the point now where Bitcoin is like financializing. And if we think about what society is a collection of individuals who are interacting economically. So if Bitcoin is infecting that system, it's got to be an economic beast. It's got to interact with, it's got to sort of infiltrate everybody's behavior, and it does so by becoming an economic beast. So we're still probably a couple halving cycles away from, that all being sort of secondary. And that's where I think, we enter the next phase, which is the infrastructure phase. Is the kids who are fucking born in 2008 and later, who don't know of a world in which Bitcoin didn't exist, they're going to view Bitcoin completely differently. Because by the time they come of age, by the time they're 20, like their last couple of years where they may have been interested in speculation, Bitcoin will have appreciated to such a degree, like especially these next two halvings, that speculation won't be on top of their mind. They'll be looking at it as this thing that is like infrastructure grade. So they'll start to build shit with it. And, when they're 20, 20, 30 onwards, right? They become the entrepreneurs. They become the capital allocators. They become the people who are doing stuff with this thing. And Bitcoin sort of takes on a new dimension. Like it gets perceived differently. And we got to remember, like Bitcoin was first perceived as internet funny money, then fucking drug money, then Ponzi scheme, then fucking gambling product. Now we're at sort of the stage of shit. This is, potentially a, treasury product. Like, so it's evolving as it goes. But we're still in the speculatory, infection stage. That still needs time to sort of filter through, and Bitcoin post that will behave differently.
So you mentioned about the next phase, right? Could you elaborate a little bit more on that? Like what does the next phase look like to you?
Well, as we get further out, the less clear we are, but essentially infrastructure.
So what did you mean by that? What did you mean by infrastructure?
Building, Lightning Network out, for example, building, Nostr out, and, integrating stuff like payments into sort of communication protocols, building out, I don't know, fucking what Embassy's doing with, sovereign tech stack stuff. So that way people can, run their own nodes, etc. So I can't even begin to think of like what that stuff will be, because in 5 years time, when, Bitcoin is a couple $1 million, like after we've gone through a couple more halving cycles, and you've got much more liquidity in the system, and therefore you have less volatility, and you have this technology base that you can query how much money there is, where all the money is, and all that sort of stuff. Like businesses will start to think about, well, how can I add this to my, whether it's my balance sheet, whether it's part of my overall tech stack, etc. So there will be service providers that come out. So Lucent Labs that I'm working with at the moment out of Austin, they want to build a full set of enterprise products for businesses to basically plug in treasury and plug in payments, and they could be anyone, and they don't have to figure it out themselves or work it out themselves or watch any fucking YouTube clips on how to run a node. It's like, hey, you call a professional, they come in and they Bitcoin enable your business basically. So all of that sort of stuff will happen in the next infrastructure stage. And the further we go into that, mini stages of the infrastructure stage, maybe we'll build some protocol stuff, then we'll see, companies emerge out of that. Like all that sort of stuff will come next by the builders of that generation, which ain't going to be you and I. You and I will fucking be sitting back relaxing, because we'll have done our time, we'll have done our work, and then it's the next generation's job to go and build shit.
What's the timeline for this? What do you think?
So that's what I think. I mean, each generation is roughly 20 years, right? So, those kids will show between 2030 and 2050, there'll be a whole lot of building shit going on. And then when they hit 40 and their kids hit 20, right? Their kids are then going to view Bitcoin in a completely different lens.
Interesting.
Structure available. Bitcoin by that stage will be far more mature in terms of price. They are going to actually use the shit. And by then we'll be fucking, almost dead. And like, that's why sort of at the beginning of the article, I say, Bitcoin's, real adoption is going to come after we all sort of die off. And like, imagine that third generation, like they won't even know of a world. Like they couldn't even fathom of a world. Like you guys live without Bitcoin. Like, I don't get it. Like, so it's a very different kind of viewpoint. And this is what I'm talk about when I think about like paradigm shifts. Like Bitcoin is a paradigm shift, and it's completely incompatible with the old. And you sort of have to go through a couple cycles until you sort of wash away. Like where, in the article I said, for the privilege of being the founding fathers of this thing, we also have to, like, the price we pay is enduring cloud world, because like we are fundamentally, like, Bitcoin clashes with the status quo, and we've just got to like hold on and carry that shit through.
Yeah, man. And it's tough, dude. It's tough in a way. I wouldn't say it's tougher than what previous generations went through with kinetic war, but in a way it is kind of, you are in an information war. It's a war of narratives. Um it's just interesting. And of course you can unplug, you just, turn off your phone, go to the beach and, pretend like it's not there. But when you are plugged in, when you are plugged into, what I consider like the modern, front lines, which is, the internet, dude, it's heavy sometimes. Like it's heavy. And I think the part that really upsets me, Svetsky, is how asleep people are. Like, and how and how prone people are to believe certain narratives, whether, that's narratives from legacy corporate media or the government, right? And I saw this and what comes to mind is this very powerful quote from Jack Posobiec. He said, if social media was around in 2003, I don't think the Iraq war would have happened. And that tweet really stuck by me. Like it really made me understand how much Bitcoin has changed everything, right? It's disintermediated information.
Let me add one. If social media wasn't around in 2019 or 2020, COVID would not have happened.
You want to elaborate a little bit?
Why did it happen? It happened because there was fucking online hysteria and everyone lost their minds.
It would have just been a bad flu, is what you're saying.
Exactly. Nobody would have known shit. Nobody would have known shit. Like if you look at, I mean, that kind of thing would have totally spread long before if we had social media the way we did in 2003, whatever the virus was back then, we would have had lockdowns back then.
Yeah.
So basically it's that double-edged sword, right? Is and that's sort of how technologies function. But like, it's a tool to be used, and yes, when you're surrounded by idiots, the tool gets used in strange ways.
100%. 100%. All right, dude, I want to pivot a little bit. It's one of your tweets, really stuck by me, which is, you said capitalism is brutal. Goes on to say, we don't live in a capitalist world, do we? We continue to see privatized wins and socialized losses.
Yeah, that Bugs Bunny meme, right? What's it called? My gains, our losses.
It's such a good meme. Opti, could you pull it up in the background so we could share it, so we can show everybody who's watching?
It's the bomb. I mean, look, it's like, I don't know the exact details of the whole Silicon Valley thing, but as soon as you hear FDIC backstop, blah 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 blah, basically somebody else paid for someone else's misfortune. And I'm not saying that the startups were at fault, that it was they shouldn't have been, it wasn't their fault they had money here, it was the assholes who were running Silicon Valley. I get all of that, but the money just got fronted by an organization who doesn't actually create any value, which is the government or the central bank. Which means that the money is going to come out of the pocket of people who had no upside in those startups or anything in the first place. So anyway, we keep repeating the same thing, and we keep playing from the same playbook. I did a tweet actually the other day, which was, if you want to teach your kids capitalism, if you want to teach someone communism, let them play with something. When they break it, have someone else pay for it. If you want to teach them capitalism, let them play with something. When they break it, they need to fix it or pay for it. And that's sort of really the difference, right? And when we see this with socialization of losses, right? It's, go out, move fast, break things, take risks, blah, 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 and make a shitload of money when everything's going right. And then when you fuck up, whoop, call up daddy government, bail our asses out. Someone fucked up. And it's just so wrong, man. Like, what the fuck did the farmer in the Midwest have to, pay more for goods and services for? Because some monkeys out in Silicon Valley were, trying to play wannabe Wall Street. Like, or got blown up because the government was fucking around with, interest rates and all this sort of stuff and blew up the bond market. Like, it's just so fucking wrong, because you got idiots just doing whatever they want, and then someone else is always paying the bill. And I don't even know what to say about it anymore at this point. It's just so ridiculous.
Yeah, dude, it's absolutely. And then what the part that frustrates me the most, Svetsky, is they blame capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, this is the woes of capitalism. What's the my favorite one is like, this is end stage capitalism, and then you're just like, dude, what are you talking? This isn't capitalism. What are you talking about? Yeah.
Capitalism would have been the bank fucking fails and everyone lost their deposits, and somebody goes and like loses their mind and maybe does something stupid over the thing because they just lost everything. Like, or like everyone loses their money, and then the VCs who backed a bunch of these companies come together, they buy out the bank, they make whatever depositors they can as whole as possible, and then they ensure that something like that never happens again, and they run it better. Like, that would have been, an outcome that would have, got my respect, or, been the right thing. But fuck, here we go again. And this is also why, like, I mean, this was supposedly a major bank blow up. Everyone's already forgotten about it, bro. No one gives a fuck. Like, no one cares. Watch, by next week there'll be something else on the news waves, some other hysteria. And this is why, like, at this point, I think that we're like, everyone's so desensitized. I don't know. This is why I think, like, if there was real outrage, if there was real something, people would have actually thought more deeply about Bitcoin, all that sort of stuff. Nah, something else is on the news now. GPT-4 got announced today, so everyone's like talking to their chatbot again.
So will people learn their lesson with this?
No, fuck no, not a chance. Maybe a couple. Maybe 0.5%. But those 0.5% are part of that intolerant minority that I said, part of that first wave. It just doesn't matter to everyone else, because guess what the lesson now is? Like, I don't know if you saw that Mercury email went out, like, where they were saying, don't worry, we've got up to 3 million FDIC insurance because we've got your deposit split across 12 banks. And I was like, so basically what that means is you're going to rip the same taxpayer off 12 times if something blows up.
Dude,
congratulations, bro.
And it's absurd that we have to live in a world where you have to do that. You have to spread your risk over a certain amount of banks so that the government could have enough, you're covered under that so-called, $250,000 FDIC insurance. Dude, it is clown world. And then this kind of reminds me of what you were talking about in the beginning about how after 2 or 3 generations, in the future, people are going to look back and think like, how in the hell, like, did they even function or live in this type of society?
Totally. That's exactly what they're going to be thinking. And that's why, again, I just think we have to take a longer term sort of view on this, because, 2022 was such a shit show. Like, everyone was convinced we were fucking going to the moon, and, or whatever the case. Like, 2021, everyone was convinced we're going to 250K. We all got ahead of ourselves. And 2022 was fucking brutal, right? Everyone was pissed off. Everyone was angry. And rightly so. We as idiots all got our hopes up. We thought we were fucking so right that, we can't be wrong. And yeah, we sort of got proven wrong on that thesis. And, like, if you sort of take a step back and really, don't care enough. The system is too complex. There's so much more going on that people are sort of concerned with. Left, right, and so much noise. We're not going to just all of a sudden, go on a fucking Bitcoin standard tomorrow. Like, we still, like, I mean, just the very fact that Bitcoin is volatile means that it's still in the speculative realm. Like, no one's using the fucking shit as money, because if you buy your goods and services today and sell them in 30 days, and in that time Bitcoin halved in price, you just fucking wiped yourself out as a business.
Yeah.
Like, so it's just the work. So we just have to. We can't put the cart before the horse. So that's not to say I'm not trying to be here and say, oh, Bitcoin's shit. No, like, approach it with the right lens at the right time. And Bitcoin is the appreciating speculative risk on asset at the moment. That's what it is. It's morphing into something else. Kid yourself that the whole fucking world's going to be using Bitcoin in 5 years or 10 years. It ain't going to fucking happen.
Yeah. And I think, but, if you take a look at some of the Twitter charts and, people are saying it's like this mass adoption in the next 10 years. And what you're saying is like, no, that's not going to happen. People are just not awakened to it. I do believe that there is going to be a good deal of adoption the next decade, but I have seen what you've been talking about in terms of the psychology of people, specifically in countries like the United States, Australia, Europe. I'm not optimistic about those countries. I'm very pessimistic.
But the funny thing is, it's also in the broken countries, man. Like Eastern Europe, you would expect everybody to be on a Bitcoin standard. No, nobody gives a fuck.
Yeah,
It's too expensive. That's the number one thing. Like, I went around, like, Macedonia, for example, and that's the kind of country that needs it. You can't send money in and out of Macedonia, for example, because the banks just fucking block the shit. Like, so there's embargoes and all that sort of stuff. They're more comfortable with stable coins, because they can get their head wrapped around that. But for them, they're just like, there's the language barrier. There's no content. There's a couple people who might get it, but by and large, like, they're just not there. And that's the same, like, in Brazil here. Like, you talk to most people, oh yeah, I've heard about the Bitcoin thing, but it's too expensive. I can't invest in that. Like, straight away, the language is, I can't invest in that. They're not even at the point of thinking about money yet, or even considering that it's better money, let alone holding their wealth in this thing that they don't understand. They just think of it as like, okay, maybe I can make money out of this thing. Like, the fact that you're thinking I can make money out of this thing shows that you don't even perceive it as money. So, like, there might be, pockets like Salvador and stuff like that, but you're talking about 0.1% of the population. Like, it's so we've really got to get past this speculatory phase. And that's why I say it's like, it's not going to be those of us who have to undo our own conditioning to sort of remove from our brain that money is a government issued thing, or is paper or credit cards, and replace that programming with, no, money can be this network that operates, in a decentralized fashion. But like that, first of all, that psychology is a big fucking leap. But kids that are born after 2008, they will perceive it completely differently. That's why I say that, when it's their turn, when they're 20 or 21, 22, whatever, from 2030 onwards, they will perceive Bitcoin differently as this. They'll see, oh, fuck, this is a tool. I can use this to fucking make my business better. I can use this to enhance, like, add fucking financial functionality into this app. Like, they're going to think completely differently, because they will not have had that prior conditioning that we've had, or that our parents had, or that the grandparents had. And that's a real shift, versus us trying to, like, convince people, like trying to convince fucking Peter Schiff ain't gonna happen. But a kid that's born in 2010, there's nothing to convince.
Yeah. And they most likely they will own Bitcoin, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, how, like, they, instead of opening a fucking bank, how hard is that going to be versus setting up a Lightning wallet? They'll be like, what the fuck? Why would I do that for?
Yeah. 100%. 100%. So
And
you
they'll be
also,
thinking in sats too as well. Sorry to keep interrupting,
no,
but
no, no,
like
no, go
at that
ahead,
point,
man. Stage is
you're
yours.
talking you're talking like two more cycles, right? So like we're at 25K now. Let's say next halving, we like, I mean, each halving is roughly an order of magnitude higher, right? So let's just assume that next halving 250, halving after that 2.5, whatever. Let's just say we get to the mill. 1 mil is cent sat parity. Like that's actually a point at which you have far more liquidity in Bitcoin, far less volatility, and people are thinking at that point in sats. That's a very different place to come from, which is what that generation will be growing up in and living in. Not, Bitcoin between 25K and 30K today. Like, it's completely different paradigms.
So one of the things, it's simply to do a good job. We are, we're slaves to news cycle. And what we've seen, Svetsky, is a calculated effort by some members of the U.S. government to at least slow down the adoption of Bitcoin. The regulatory hostility. So, it makes perfect sense. Obviously, they want to be able to control the money, print money, because that's how they pay for stuff that they normally wouldn't be able to afford if they were just collecting tax revenue alone. So does that worry you a bit? Like what's going to happen there?
I mean, if we came into this thing thinking that there wasn't going to be a fight, like, surprise, surprise, there's going to be a fight. I mean, does it worry me? I mean, like, for me personally, this is, regulatory capture was one of the big reasons why I moved away from my prior companies, that I didn't want to play ball. So, I did that. And, there might be others who do something similar, or they stay and fight and all that sort of stuff. I don't know. Like, when you're building kind of a bridge between these two systems, right? So, like, as I said, Bitcoin's incompatible with the existing system, right? And the existing system is incompatible with Bitcoin. Like, I saw some idiot, what was that? During the SVB thing, some Ethereum clown or shitcoiner on Twitter was like, can't we just put, just dollars on the blockchain? What are you talking about, bro? Like, this is sort of like the level of thinking that's, out there at the moment. So it's like, this fiat world, isn't possible to be represented on Bitcoin. Bitcoin has UTXO sets. It's got addresses. It doesn't even operate on the same primitives. So building a bridge between these two things means that you kind of need to, like, build a product that fits in on both sides. But one of the sides that you're partnering with or that you're integrating with doesn't fucking like you, or might perceive you as a threat. And you've got to, and this is where, again, it ties into the three generations, as Bitcoin isn't it's infecting the host, right? So, Bitcoin's got to kind of get to being something that the host perceives is good for it. And the only way the host can perceive it's good for it is to think that Bitcoin is some sort of gambling or speculatory instrument, because then the host will bring it in. That's the Trojan horse, right? So Wall Street will try and productize it. They'll do all this sort of stuff, and they'll bring more capital into it. But the risk is, along the way, they're going to try and kneecap it. Or, I mean, maybe this whole thing, this regulatory hostility is a way for, knocking out the small guys and, landing, like, Bitcoin ETFs with the big boys. I don't know what the behind the scenes politics are, but at the end of the day, it's going to be a fight. It's going to be ugly. And, this is once again part of why I think, like, these regulators, these guys all just need to die off, basically. And I don't mean that like we need to kill them, like, but they're all, what,
Mother Nature,
50
bro.
years old, 60,
Yeah.
70, exactly.
Mother Nature's going to take its course. I completely agree. And it's actually been known too, where, like, if you want changes, like, either in the scientific community or the educational community, right? What tends to happen is the changes happen when the previous generation starts to die off. Like, that's when
Correct.
things actually change, and
Correct.
not before. But what's really interesting, Svetsky, is that people keep living longer, right? If you look at you at like Congress, for example, or like, for example, the president, this dude's in his 80s. The Speaker of the House last year, Nancy Pelosi, was in her 80s as well. Like, it's crazy we live in that type of society.
Yeah, I know. They're living longer, and basically they're completely senile. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I feel like the next couple years, like that's why this decade is so important, right? Because this decade, like the 2020s, is kind of the last phase of Bitcoin's, first era, and we move into Bitcoin's second era, and like we're gonna have to go through all sorts of crazy shit, I think, to come out of this era, so that Bitcoin starts to be perceived as necessary infrastructure in the world.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's it's gonna happen, but fuck, we got to get through some shit.
Yeah, 100%. There's definitely a lot to go through first. Anyways, bro, so dude, first of all, you wrote an amazing article for Simply, really appreciate that. And this SVB is a masterclass on why Bitcoin, or why Bitcoin, or was it? And it says, well, people forget about it in a few weeks. And I think you were touching upon that in the very beginning. You were, you mentioned it, right?
Yeah. So I wrote the article over the weekend, right? And I hadn't heard that the bailout actually occurred, right? And then Bill Ackman on Monday opened up Twitter, is like, this is not a bailout. They're fucking gaslighting, right? But I wrote it thinking that, hey, maybe this is the moment where everybody realizes that what Bitcoiners have been saying, right? Because Silicon Valley bros and the crypto people and all that sort of stuff, they've always been laughing at Bitcoiners. They're like, oh yeah, Bitcoin's boring. Like, what, you're gonna just sit there and save it? Like, what do you mean? Where's the yield? What can I do? The classic, what can I do with my Bitcoin? You know what I mean? It's like, well, what do you do with money, bro? Like, what, you're gonna fucking build a house with money? Like, you save your fucking money and then you use it, right? So that's what Bitcoin does really well. You save it and nobody can take it from you. Fantastic. Oh yeah, but that's too boring. Where's the yield? Where's this? Where's that? So the premise of the article was like, hey, maybe this is what it takes for the Silicon Valley bros that were laughing at us to realize how important. Like, first of all, they realized that counterparty risk is real. Then they realized that yield is a fantasy. Because particularly in crypto, we all know it's a fucking fantasy because there's nothing productive underlying it. So crypto yield is just like Ponzi upon Ponzi upon Ponzi. But, in this case, they were supposedly getting yield from risk-free assets, fucking US treasuries, and they blew up. So like, what better way to prove the point that you just can't have fucking yield out of nowhere? And anyway, my whole thing was, I hope this is used as an opportunity to understand Bitcoin. So this is what I said. It's like, this is a masterclass in why Bitcoin matters. And then I said that, the risk here is that the Silicon Valley guys, instead of being builders or fixers, they just take a leaf out of the Wall Street playbook and just do what those guys did. And I said, I hope that doesn't happen, but it's probably likely to happen. And then, of course, over the weekend, exactly that happened. Maybe with a couple, alterations, from what I understand, like the shareholders didn't get bailed out and all that sort of stuff. It was just the depositors that got made whole. But still, like, that money's got to come from somewhere. And I think Guy Swan did a really good tweet thread on that. Is like, I don't think people realize, but where did the money come from? Like, it literally got taken from somebody else who had nothing to do with this. And that's just theft. So yeah, unfortunately, in the end, I don't think anyone learned shit. And it seems like the response, at least from the Silicon Valley side of things, seems to be that banks, or the digital banks that sort of sit in the middle, like Mercury, Brex, and all that sort of stuff, are just going to split your deposits up amongst multiple banks so that they can have a larger consolidated FDIC thing, which just means that the government can rip the taxpayer off multiple times.
Yeah.
I don't know what to say about that.
Svetski, do you mind turning on the light in your room? It looks like it got a little bit dark.
Yeah, it did. Give me a second.
But yeah,
how's that?
Yeah, absolutely perfect. But that's one of the things that I've also been hearing on Twitter, right? It's just this blow up really just consolidated the banks even more.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It consolidated the banks, and now it consolidates the risk, right? So two things. So what's happening is that they're pushing the risk up, 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 and at some point, the risk is just going to sit entirely with the Fed, right? Then what, like sort of why even have the big four that are there? Just do away with them and just fucking deal directly with the Fed. And that's really, I mean, what's that pathway make way for? Central bank digital currencies. So it's all kind of like, and this, I'm not saying it as a conspiracy. It's like, oh, we're planning it this way. It's like, this shit's just fucking happening because the system is imploding. And every time something implodes, they take the easy way out, which is a bailout. And every time you take the easy way and bail out, the trade-off is some sort of consolidation at the next layer. And then you create that consolidation, which then just moves the risk up. And then it creates a new thing. We'll play musical chairs again. Then when that'll blow up, it'll consolidate even further. We'll get to 2 players, blah, blah, blah. And then we'll get to the last fucking big boss. And when that blows up, then, we got Bitcoin.
Man, I think that's what we're all looking forward toward. Anyways, so let's talk about your latest book, Bushido of Bitcoin. What's it about?
Okay, so we'll touch on this super briefly. It is... I wanted to ask the question of, if Bitcoin is going to succeed, right? So I make the assumption that Bitcoin succeeds somewhere in the next 50, 100 years, right? And Bitcoin hodlers basically become the socioeconomic elite. What happens? Do we just become fucking Lambo driving, Louis Vuitton wearing dickheads like our friend Richard? Or do we become the next parasitic political class? Because that could happen too. Like large Bitcoin holders start their own little cabal and do strange things. Granted, there's more economic consequence on a Bitcoin standard, so that might be harder to do. But you could still become a piece of shit with a lot of Bitcoin. Or do we seek to become men and women of virtue, basically? And so what I did was I did a deep dive for about a year. I studied like ancient warrior cultures, because I asked like which cultures embodied the greatest degree of sort of virtue and morality, and it always came out to be warrior cultures because they live and sort of breathe at the edge of life and death, right? So in that environment, you can't have weak virtues. Like, so I studied the samurai, the Spartans, the ancient Macedonians, sort of the chivalric knights from the Templars to the Franks to the English and all that sort of stuff. And what I found was a whole commonality of particular set of virtues. So I wrote basically what are the 11 virtues that Bitcoiners should seek to embody in order to effectively become leaders of the future world. Because and I know this is a trope in sort of the Bitcoin space, like, oh, no leaders, and that's horseshit. Always leaders. The question is, scale, are you a leader? Are you a leader of your own life? Are you a leader of your family, your household, your community, your business, etc.? Like, different people operate at different scales, right? The problem we have today is we have unaccountable so-called leaders, which I mean, I can't even say fucking people like Biden, etc., because they're just fucking parasites. They don't even qualify under leadership. But anyway, to sort of tie off the idea, that's basically what it is. It's not really a big book. It's a question. It's a book about culture, history, and the future of like humanity. And I want to show. And I guess the relationship to Bitcoin is that most likely the people with the money are going to be Bitcoiners. So we should start thinking about this stuff now for our kids and for children.
How and I think Opti and I have definitely had conversations about this particular subject. So I find it fascinating. I think that it is a topic worth exploring. Do you think that Bitcoiners, which become the new elite class, I hate saying that, right? It sounds painful to say that, but if you have a very wealthy portion of the population, you could basically make the case that that's the new elite class, right? They're the ones that are going to have the most political influence. So we're right about Bitcoin. Obviously, both of us think we are. and it goes into that transition. Bitcoiners become the most powerful, influential, wealthiest people on the planet. Do you think they could avoid the trappings of, you know, do you think that, do you think that Bitcoiners can avoid the trappings that has affected the
Everyone else
yes.
previously? Yeah. That's the question I ask. I don't know the answer to that. We're going to find out in the next 50 or 100 years. But I, without a set of virtues, like without a code, right? You don't avoid those trappings, right? So, and this is sort of what happened in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries, was the West did away, deconstructed all of those prior codes. They deconstructed all of that stuff. They laughed at it. You know, they laughed off Christianity. They laughed off this, you know, chivalry is dead, right, and all that sort of stuff. And they basically eroded what held the, you know, what gave the culture strength. So this is why, you know, I wrote this, is that Bitcoiners can avoid that if they have something more to aspire towards than just making fucking money, or just stacking sats, just being the richest, right? There's more to life than that stuff. And, you know, I listed out 11 virtues. It's like, if you seek to embody these virtues, if you seek to sort of make these principles your guiding, your North Star or your guiding light, chances are that you become a better individual. You don't become a turd. And, you know, there's more people around, civilization gets. I make a point in there. It's like, you know, people are always saying, oh, you know, how do we change the world? And they're looking at, you know, somebody to change the world from the center and it out. Like, no. You change the world by being someone that others want to be like. You do it for example. So become happier, wealthier, stronger, fitter, you know, family, fucking good kids, smart kids, healthy kids, like, you know, cool business, like all that sort of stuff. You become someone others want to be like, or others want to emulate, or others are inspired by. What fucking word do you want to put in there? But that's sort of how you fix the world. And, you know, you don't become a piece of shit. Like, nobody really wants to be like Richard Hart, right? Like, wearing a fucking Louis Vuitton onesie. Like, it's cool, bro. And, you know, when people see that, they're like, okay, I don't want to be anything like that. And then unfortunately they dump Bitcoin into that sort of equation. But, like, you know, I think, to answer your question, I think you can avoid the trappings. But it's a question of, as I said, like, what, who do we want to become? And then that will sort of sway that outcome.
Yeah. And I think it's a very, very important question. And let's see what the future holds. I'll leave it at that. Anyway, Svetski, thank you so much for joining us on Simply Bitcoin IRL. I know you have to run. Why don't you tell everybody where they can find you online and what you're working, what are your projects that you're working on these days?
For sure. So thank you again, bro. Really good to see you. Twitter at Svetski writes WRITES, like Svetsky.info should also work. That should take you to like a link tree, and it's got some stuff in there. Uncommunist.com is obviously the bookmark Moss and I wrote. BitcoinTimes.io, if people want to check that out, that's got a bunch of essays on it, and, you know, copies of the actual collectible. And Bitcoin will be coming out later this year, so probably June, July. And yeah, and check out lucentlabs.co if you're sort of interested in what kind of infrastructure companies are going to be built over the next couple of decades, which I think is going to be really cool. So that's the
awesome, dude. Sure, man. All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. Another episode of Simply Bitcoin IRL. We will see you tomorrow, 12:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for a brand new episode of Simply Bitcoin. Love you all. See you tomorrow. Peace.